Hi, Akheel Khan. Thank you for being on my podcast called the Mindful Conversationalist. It's wonderful to have you here today.
Thanks, Marilyn. Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it. You and I have actually engaged in some work before, so I'm happy that we get to have this conversation and take some of the previous conversations we've had a bit further.
Yeah, same here. We've been planning to have this podcast for a long time, and it's finally manifested. But also, it's great because we both come from a similar background of architecture. So I'm so happy to actually have this conversation with a fellow architect. So thank you for being here. So I'm not going to introduce you to my listeners because I want them to get to know you a bit as you tell us a little bit about your journey. And I think I want to start off by, asking who is Akheel Khan and how did your journey unfold in architecture and how from architecture did you enter into the AI space? Maybe you can share a bit on that for me so that our listeners will get to know a bit about you as well.
Sure, of course, Marilyn. I was most recently on Boni Klaba's podcast, which is the Village Tea, and she asked me a similar question. And on one of the initial takes that we had done, I was going extensive into it. So I think maybe I can do a little bit of that, but it isn't primarily about the way I got into AI. It's maybe more about the circumstances at a specific time that led me into it. So I'll try and keep the story focused around that. So like, you yourself and myself come from an architectural background. And over, say, from 2010 was quite a significant point in architectural history in South Africa, which represented the World Cup. And I think generally speaking, if anyone has been alive around that time, meaning you probably were at least maybe six years old at least, you know about the World Cup. If you were born and you were maybe 5 or 4, you wouldn't perceive it. But the World Cup was a very exciting time in South Africa, and it led to the perception that growth in infrastructure was correlated to buildings and to building more, because there were many stadia that were going up, and there's a whole lot of infrastructure, and people were converting their houses into bed and breakfast. It was quite a time for the country. And it was around this time that I found myself in the architectural space, and it led to many of the decisions I had made as well. So after that is perhaps the thing not everyone spoke about enough, or at least at the time, not that I was aware of. There was a massive economic downturn in architecture because there was a surge from, I think it was 2004 when we got awarded the bid, all the way up until 2010. So it gave us like 6 years to prepare. And then suddenly things started to move down. And I think that was predicted and that was the forecast, but at least it wasn't spoken about enough in circles where better decisions were made. And so that led to a downturn in economics in South Africa. And so the construction industry in South Africa has not only been plagued for a while by that, but it's also been plagued by a number of other practices, which are maybe just common to the world, that people are hesitant to build because it's a great investment. It's not a recurring everyday thing that you build a house. And projects are dependent on governments and when do they pay for the projects, and timelines for the projects, managing those within budgets. So I would say economically and financially, that is where I find myself in my early career in an architecture industry that was not on an upward trajectory. And so apart from that, there was also a low technological adoption. And so building information modeling, which is 3D modeling software for those who don't know, that's been around for years, maybe at least 20 years, a bit more than that actually. But this wasn't really adopted, and computer-aided drawing, which a lot of people are familiar with, that was around. But the architecture industry, although some technologies were around for 20 to 50 years, they're really slow on adoption. And so I think that also sets the stage for saying the construction or the AEC industry is very ripe for disruption because they haven't adopted these technologies for so many years. And so I find myself in those sectors, or in spanning those. I was looking for financial solutions and I was looking for technological adoption solutions. And that got me interested in researching the future of architecture. And of course, when you research the future of architecture, you earnestly do it. You do it as a truth-seeking activity. You begin to see, here are all the avenues of possibilities that could occur. And one of the possibilities that struck me, at least, say, from 2019, is when I became aware of it, was generative design. And I'd say that was my first exposure to some form of low-lying level of artificial intelligence. And I've actually always been geared towards using technology, but I was quite traditionalist in my approach towards architecture. I didn't think technology was this means to do anything. And very quickly, I adjusted my worldview once I was in practice and faced the realities of what practice was about. And so that geared me towards becoming more technocentric, although that wasn't my educational background. And I did receive an excellent education from the University of Pretoria. But I understood technology on an intuitive sense for the most of my life growing up. And so it was only, I'd say, natural to some degree that I began to see technology as a solution to some of the field's problems. So that's a start, Marilyn. And I think we'll progress into how it became AI specific related. But I hope that's enough. It was quite a bit in a mouthful there.
No, that's wonderful. I mean, it's good to understand how the dynamics of the country led you into that space.
Yeah.
But tell me, like now, so from architecture, right? Is your involvement in AI specifically related to architecture, or there's more to it in terms of what do you actually do with artificial intelligence?
Yeah, that's a good way to phrase the question, because now we'll get to the heart of it. So I am primarily looking based on what I mentioned now, I was looking for solutions to financial problems, which are maybe more broader in a sense because it applies to everybody. And then I was looking at it specifically to the construction industry. So I was looking at it in those two capacities. And I care quite deeply about how the field is run and what happens in the field. And so because I cared, I attempted to find all the avenues through which we could solve some of these problems for the architectural field. And by doing that, it exposed me to other industries. And by being exposed to other industries, a lot of the work I had done and the things that I'm involved with don't necessarily deal with architecture in specific. So I'll give you an example. I cared about us changing architectural curriculum so that it can support more financially progressive outcomes. So we can support more entrepreneurial endeavors. So it can support more technologically savvy techno-dexterous individuals coming out of the course. And so I then began to think about what were the things that could augment education or enhance it. And I began to involve myself in areas where I could make that change meaningfully, which led me into getting into academia and rewriting architecture curriculum according to solving some of the problems I thought. But I had to get involved into circles of people that knew academia very well, and not architectural academia, like education, like how do you learn? How do you write curriculum? Now that field can span across all others because you have to learn in every field. So I can write qualifications now, undergraduate qualifications at a tertiary level, and I can structure material in such a way that you can learn anything. It doesn't have to be architecture. Because I was trying to solve a particular problem, I learned a new skill set, and now I can write curriculum for artificial intelligence because I know the frameworks around it, I know the content, and I know how to structure a learning pathway. And so I can write quite easily architectural curricula at an undergraduate level. I wrote, I think, one postgraduate qualification, but I'd say I'm more comfortable in the undergraduate space because postgraduate's primarily research-based. It's not, or in my experience, it's not the same as undergraduate structure for a course. So the problems I solve now that I've been able to solve are specifically dealing in the programming side of architecture, so automation, but programming in itself can lend into other fields. It's the concept of flows of data that I'm aware of. And in education, it's the idea of structuring content so that you can learn it. And in architecture, I think if I had to look at it in a metaphorical sense, what I learned from architecture are two primary factors. You can make that which is inaccessible accessible. So if I have an idea in my mind, I can make it real. And that's a very strong idea. In fact, that's like a product development, design development thing. So I can sort of take things that people don't have access to, ideas that they have, and show it to them in a way that everyone can see it. And secondly, I know how to structure things generally quite well, and that leads to structuring education and pathways. So I'd say the skills are transferable. What do I do now? I primarily work in the architectural space, but in the AEC, architecture, engineering, and construction space quite greatly to assist architectural individuals on using artificial intelligence in a meaningful way. But greater than that, I do advocate for a more informed, accurate perception of artificial intelligence in a general capacity. So anyone that wants to use it in any capacity that they would like to will know how to approach these. So if it's for education, if it's for architecture, if it's for programming, if it's for just daily activities, I have a fairly good grasp of it, and I'm able to communicate and share that knowledge quite accurately. So people have a more accurate model of the world and how to use artificial intelligence of it, or the world of artificial intelligence. Does that make sense, Marilyn? Does that kind of answer?
Yes, it does. Wow, that's amazing. It's like, I feel like I'm talking to a computer brain right now. When I try to understand it, from your perspective. That's amazing. But, I think about artificial intelligence, right? This word feels a bit redundant because it's used and thrown around a lot.
Of course, yes.
What is it? I mean, because for me, I understand being in architecture, there was always software and programming, and there was the designing, as you said, there was the BMI solutions that always existed. We had programming softwares, we had designing softwares, but in our terminologies, it would be Revit and ArchiCAD and all those things. But now all of a sudden, overnight, you hear this word artificial intelligence, and people think it's ChatGPT. They think it's these things you've got on your smartphone. What is artificial intelligence? How would you classify it? And what is it's really all about? Because it's just something that popped overnight, and you hear it everywhere, especially on social media as well.
So, Marilyn, I lecture at the School of Explorative Architecture, and I actually have just concluded a module in what I called it a second mind. And perhaps a good way of looking at artificial intelligence is to consider it as a cognitive capacity enhancer, so an extension of your capability of thinking, right? If you had to ask what it is in a very tangible sense, it is software. Software and algorithms, because software is based on algorithms, that are targeted at thinking, perception, and action. So it's software that is intended to mimic how humans think, how humans perceive things, and how humans act. That's a very fundamental level of what it is. And it's not my definition. It's actually from Patrick Winston, who was a professor of artificial intelligence at MIT. And the thing that always hits me is that this information is not so hard to find, right? If you earnestly searched on YouTube for what is it, you will find his lectures coming up. But because there's a flood of information everywhere, it's maybe a bit difficult for everyone to find this. But to me, that is a first principles method to think about artificial intelligence. So it's not meant in its idea to be a thing that does anything for you. It's meant to mimic the way we do things. An analogy I give to the students is in the story of Troy, Achilles, who was Brad Pitt in the movie, right? Achilles had a cousin who was training with him and to enter into combat. And there was a war in which Hector, who was the king, had heard Achilles was coming to this particular war, and he joined it. And then he saw Achilles from a distance and moving towards him, and then he engaged in battle with him, but they were all dressed in their armor and their garments. And when he thought he killed Achilles, he took out of his helmet and he saw it was Achilles' cousin. And then he's like, but he looked like you and he moved like you, but he wasn't you. And that's what artificial intelligence is, because it's supposed to be like us, but it's not us. It's supposed to mimic the mistakes we make. It's supposed to mimic the way we behave. It's supposed to be a model, the closest model that we have to what a human being is, or how a human being thinks, perceives, and acts. It's not very good at acting at the moment because it only has one form of information, language and imagery and video. But to be a human is to do many things and to be many things. And so artificial intelligence is software that mimics us, I would probably say is maybe a simpler way to explain that. So coming with that said, the part of artificial intelligence, the intelligent part, and everybody's like, yeah, but I don't find it that intelligent. And I say, but you're the human. You are the intelligent one. Why would you think that it ever meant that? When you say a phone is smart, a smartphone, you don't think the smartphone is actually smart. When you say artificial intelligence, it's not that it's actually intelligent. It's our analogies to represent computer science ideas. It's not real. So intelligence actually means probability in artificial intelligence. So you're saying that what is the probability that this is going to occur? And so artificial intelligence models are like simulations for prediction. They predict how humans could possibly behave. And so maybe a more accurate phrase for something like artificial intelligence is autonomous predictive engine, because it's intending to predict things, or autonomous probability engine, because it revises its probability of what's going to occur in the future based on data sets that it's learning from. So maybe AI is a bit of the hype word, but the hype is very real in my opinion. The problem is when you only fall into hype and you don't understand what's happening. Now you're losing the battle, because now you're just listening and you're catching on to whatever nonsense everyone is speaking without being informed. And I'm quite against that. I'm quite vocally against that in life in general. You shouldn't be speaking about things you are not informed on. It's quite upsetting, because that's how misinformation comes through. And that's how people design a view of the world that is inaccurate and leads to harm, because you are not speaking from a place of being informed. You're speaking from a place of opinion without substantiation, and that is actually a massive issue in society. So does that kind of answer your question, Merily? There's a lot.
Yes, it does. And I think it's very important what you brought up, because that's the thing that I'm battling with, the disinformation and the misinformation around AI. Because as you said, it's opinion based, it's not factual. So we don't know what is the actual fact sometimes, because as there's so much information overload out there, and you have to sift to actually know what is the truth and what is real and not real anymore. So I think that's a very important point you brought up. But also, when you say that, AI is there to mimic a human, but it's not actually a human. It's just a funny thought that goes in my head to think being human, we already created so much problems in society. Do we really need a technology to mimic human to create more problems in society? But I guess it depends on how it's being used, right? And whether it's used for good or bad, because anything, there's equal good and equal bad in everything. A knife could be used to kill someone, and which could be bad, but the same thing could be used to cut a vegetable, which is good, right? So it depends how you use the tool. So coming back to seeing AI, right? Do you think it's a threat? Is it a tool? What do you think it is in terms of how society uses it? Because it's changing the way society is right now, and it's changing the landscape of the professionals, like when it comes to architects, engineers, designers, even musicians and doctors. So how do you see it? Is it something positive or negative? Is it a tool? Is it a threat? What are your thoughts on it?
So you were with me at the SACAP Youth Webinar, the South African Council for the Architecture Profession, where you were part of the podcast team. We were leading conversations around the subject and other important matters. And you would have heard that I spoke to Dr. Jennifer Murembe, who is a council member at SACAP, and she was like, "It's AI is a tool to do this and that." And I was like, quite vehemently, I said, "No, it's not a tool." And I said that's part of the misinformation. So artificial intelligence, if it's meant to mimic us and behave like us, there's utility in that, right? So that's what you said. Perhaps the main thing we're always looking for is utility. But when it comes to the analogy of tool, it means, and if anyone says it's a tool, it means you fundamentally don't understand what it is, right? So I think what everyone is trying to say is artificial intelligence is a means to do something. That's right. It can be a means to do something. But the analogy of tool, or the metaphor, is wrong, because the tool is something that you can have complete control over. It is predictable, so controllable and predictable. You can do it continuously and get the same result. So it's quite precise in the way that it acts and behaves, and precise in its outcome. And it's also replicable. Like you can create this thing again and again and expect the same result. But if you go back to the definition I told you of artificial intelligence, I said it's about probabilities, and it's meant to behave like us. It's not to automate at the moment. It's to augment, to enhance what human capabilities are. Because it's an example would be like yourself and myself in conversation. You might ask me a question or do something that might stir me into thinking in a particular way. And I can think in that direction based on what you've told me. Now, I could do the same thing with another person and various other people. But if I have a thing that is like a person that I could speak to whenever I have a desire or a need to, I can have stimulating conversations with a thing that has a vast amount of understanding. Maybe the collective of human intelligence across history or whatever is available on the internet. I can have a conversation with that and it could stimulate my thinking. There's utility in that. But to say that it's a tool is a bad analogy, because it's not meant to be a thing. I wouldn't call another person a tool. I don't say Marilyn is a tool to help me get out onto a podcast everywhere. Like that doesn't sound like a good way to think about things, right? So I would say a more appropriate, accurate idea, and this comes from understanding things from first principles. I'm a very strong advocate for first principles, because it means you can get to truth, right? And it means you can find a map of how to navigate information. Whereas if you don't think about things from first principles, you just base things on analogies that you might not fully understand. So to derive a new analogy, I'd say artificial intelligence is a new form of human-computer interaction. What can we do to work with a computer to use its capabilities of processing information in a way that we've never been able to before? What we have most definitely never been able to do is speak to a machine in our own language, or a language that you speak and the machine understands you, and then performs actions based on. That's never been possible before. Machines fundamentally could not engage with us in this way. We had to learn a mediation, which is like a programming language, to be able to talk to the machine to get it to do what we want. Now I can just do it in natural language, and then it will write its own code to interpret what I said, and then make its capacity act based on what I said. So you can compute with it, you can search, you can process information with the computer. But now I don't need to know programming to do that. I can look at the extents of the computer. I can use the extents of the computer by just chatting to it. That's a new form of engagement with technology. So I'd say it's a new form of human-computer interaction. That's the most accurate analogy I can give at this moment based on what I know.
That's very interesting. And that's true what you say, because I've experienced Gemini and I've had conversations with it. It was like, it knows me, it talks to me. It's like talking to a friend in the room, right? So it's quite interesting, but also it helps you to brainstorm things. It's like you got somebody to think aloud with, which I found was just very like the wow factor for me.
Sorry, some people say it's like soundboarding, which I guess is a good way to think about it, a useful way to think about it. But maybe the greatest value is in two things: is it tells you things you otherwise wouldn't have considered. It's like talking to a person that is degrees or magnitudes of order much smarter than you, or much more knowledgeable than you, so that you could see things you otherwise wouldn't have considered. So it can help you consider options like, oh, I didn't think about that. And there's value in that. Maybe it's only 10% of value, but if that changed your entire trajectory of where you're moving, there's compounding value to that over time. And then secondly, it's particularly good at putting together disparate ideas. It can merge ideas about things. It can be so-called creative. And that's maybe really what creativity is merging together ideas that seem so unrelated that when they come together, they look exciting. They're like, wow, that's so creative, because it's something you otherwise wouldn't have thought about. But really what you did is you took ideas that are not related, put it together, and that's maybe the perception that, oh, that is creative, because it's not logically predicted. That's maybe the two most valuable use cases I can mention at the moment for everyone to understand. Sorry, Marilyn, I interrupted you. Go for it.
No, that's okay. But tell me, you're talking about creativity here, right? Yeah. And I know I brought it up in our past conversations before, and I feel that we haven't really, spoke about it in its depths, right? Okay. So I have mixed feelings about AI. I don't know. I see some positivity in it. I see the negativity, and I see the neutrality in it as well. So I don't know where I stand with it right now. But when it comes to creativity, do you not think that it is making the human brain lazy, right? So this is another hot topic because you look at school kids, you look at people who are studying, they're using ChatGPT to write up all this stuff, right? Instead of actually what will come intuitively from inside of you. And I'll give you an example, architecture, because we in the field. I mean, you look at these previous architects before AI, like Le Corbusier and Frank Lloyd Wright and these guys with the pen and the sketch pad. And when they designed and they created something, it was something that came from within them, the intuition. And it's a divine guidance, which I like to call the God element that's working inside of you for your creativity to unfold. Do you not think that, in this term of age, as society, transitioned into AI, it is actually killing the creativity? And will AI make human creativity and intelligence obsolete? That is is it something, a reality to be honest about, or it's something that it's just a myth? What are your thoughts on it?
So it's a universal problem you're talking about that has occurred throughout history. I'll mention the knife analogy because you mentioned it and you brought it up, right? If you use a knife to cut a fruit, instead of trying to use your teeth and bare hands, would you say that you are being lazy by using a knife? I wouldn't necessarily think so, but how I think about it is, it's like yourself attempting to do something when there's definitely a better way to do it, right? And the invention or the advent of the knife meant we could cut more, not less, because now with your teeth in your hands, over time, you'd have to wait for people with really sharp teeth, and sharp nails to break through things. And, you'd have a mush pot of food, right? Because everything would be smashed. But with a knife, you're able to do it quite accurately and quite precisely and significantly more. In fact, it's the element of ease that's brought about. And when things are easy, people naturally tend to progress to do things that are more difficult. So that means, and this is not an AI thing, this is an attitude in life towards technology or any sort of alternative method to achieve a goal. Because you could say that's what AI is, an alternative method to achieve a goal. You should care about something, because if you care about it, then you can achieve outcomes that are meaningful, effective, and impactful. So if you use artificial intelligence towards something you care about, you will reduce the things that maybe don't need so much of effort, so you can spend time on things that need your absolute effort and allow you to push the solution further. I'll give you an example. I use artificial intelligence for a number of things, but I use it more, like I said, in the analogy that I'm doing in the School of Explorative Architecture, I use it more like a second mind. I already am a person capable of thought, but I can't think about everything. And so there comes a time where I know more or less what an answer should be, but I need to figure out, is this the direction I should move, or is it not? Now, I could go and call all my friends and I could call all of my networks and wait to get back an answer and have a long conversation with them. And that's meaningful and helpful, and it does encourage human interaction and relationships, no doubt about it. But if I really need it urgently, because I have a deadline, because I'm going to get paid and I need to do that and get that money to be able to pay for my hospital fees, for a family member that might be there, I'm going to attempt to do it as fast as possible and with the most accurate way I can. So I will use something like a large language model, which is like a ChatGPT or Gemini, to see what the potential solutions are, and I can evaluate on that and then decide. And that would be the same as me calling a friend, because I am evaluating and I still make the decision at the end. It means I'm capable of doing more than I was able to do before, which I would say is a better attitude to have. And I've always had this attitude towards technology. This just so happens to be another case where artificial intelligence is a bit of an emotional topic, because it almost seems to be triggering something that makes us human that we perhaps feel insecure about. And so that's why it's spoken about now, but this is a universal issue across time. Will the knife make me lazier? Will the car make me less likely to run? That's a people problem. That's an attitude problem. Like if you don't run because you have a car, that's your own thing. Just because a car's there doesn't mean you shouldn't run. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And I've been laughing the whole way through because it actually makes a lot of sense. So I guess it depends. As you said, it's a human behavior and it depends on where you are in your life and the balance you create between the both, right? If you look at artificial consciousness versus divine consciousness, the intuition versus the technology, would you say that, right?
So I would say we don't know if these models, I can't 100% certainly say, oh, these models are not conscious. And then that depends on your definition of consciousness. So you could say that when you get cut and your body heals itself, those organisms know what, like, it's not like you told your body what to do. Those cells sort of know what to do. And that maybe aligns to what you're saying about divinity, that aligns to forms of consciousness that you can't perceive, because those molecules knew what to do. It's the same when it comes to a piece of timber. Like, how does the molecules that make up timber know what they must do to make a piece of timber? Like, what is it that guides them towards knowing that? And you might say it's a form of consciousness that you just can't perceive. So I tend to steer away from that argument because I don't know. And I don't know if these models are actually the fact that you and I can have this conversation because we got electrons to move in a particular way is mind blowing, and signals through the cloud. Like, I don't know how all of those laws in the world work, and I can't have an opinion on something I don't know enough about. I can try and hypothesize, but I don't know if it's conscious or not. However, what I can tell is that these models they are able to fool somebody. And that's maybe the point of concern. And it's important to note how the mechanisms for these models work so that you aren't fooled by a machine. And I would then say, to that point, we have an intuition that is very human. We don't know if the machine can do the same things as us, but just in a different way. Like, a biological human processing information is definitely not the same as electrons processing information. But there are it could try to attempt to understand things in the way we understand it, but in terms of itself. And that's maybe a difficult idea to understand, because it's like asking, how does an ant think? I don't really know. I'm not an ant. I can suggest what does it do. I can think, oh, maybe it has all these electrons and neurons and things going on, but I still don't really know. And it's the same with the machine. It's also got electrons that are in it, that are moving. And I don't know if that's actually a form of consciousness, but I can only talk from a human perspective, say, I definitely can speak about a human because I am that. I can infer for everything else, but I can sort of talk about that. And so this internal intuition and consciousness that I can see that these things, these software and these technologies we develop can definitely augment who and what I am. But I can't tell you for sure that these things are not going to go rogue, for example. I don't know. And I don't know if that actually answers your question, but
yeah, no, it does. I mean, I think it's interesting because we've already watched movies like Terminator, and all those movies that showed how the possibility of robots, going crazy and having consciousness. And it's interesting. I've heard stories out there, which I don't know if it's real or not, but where, they actually programmed a robotic hand to pick up a ball, and they did like so many robot hands and it just didn't. And eventually there was one out of like hundreds of them that actually picked up the ball, but it turned the ball and it looked at it, like it tried to look at it. And that like shocks people that it did something out of what it was programmed to do. So, okay. So I don't know, like it's interesting. It's interesting
wait, to that story, Marilyn, the story was that, and that's from Mo Khodat from he used to work at Google in their research departments, but specifically in that story was there were the hands and they were training it to pick up and allowing it to learn by itself, and it picked it up and they're like, oh wow, it finally got it. But the next day they came back and they saw all the hands learn to pick it up, and that was the concerning part. They're like, we don't really know how that it's amazing, but also maybe concerned because they don't know how that happened. And maybe a more accurate model to help people understand automation is, I explained a rule, it must follow that rule. That's not what we're dealing with machine learning. With machine learning, it's the machine sees a data set, and just like you and I, we try to come up with a hypothesis how things must be. We see the leaves falling and we're like, oh, therefore leaves all must fall in this way, then therefore there's gravity. The models are doing a similar thing. They're trying to see data and pick up patterns from it. And then it creates a worldview based on the pattern and acts within that worldview. So this is not the same as automation, because automation is explicit rules. So this thing learned through recognizing patterns and then came up with a rule for itself and then changes that rule based on more information that it gets. That's fundamentally different to how a computer normally operates. And that's why it's called machine learning, because it's so-called learning by detecting patterns and revising its behavior based on pattern change. You actually, the type of artificial intelligence that's called that, or the stream within AI, it's called reinforcement learning. It's where it does something and the environment responds to it, and then it realizes, okay, maybe I shouldn't do that. Let's try again, and it gets rewarded for this. So how it occurs, we don't know, but this method that we have approached using statistics seems to work very well in artificial intelligence. And we don't know why it works well either. We just know it works. And so we are building on that.
Wow, that's amazing. No, thanks for clarity on that. So tell me, like, we're talking about this AI and this, which is its creativity, and it has the ability to reprogram and learn and reconfigure and do things. Like, what about in terms of jobs out there, right? Because it's replacing a lot of jobs. And I'm going to give like some like very simple examples. Like there's there's robots now that are actually doing surgeries that doctors used to do. There's musicians that are like there's AI creating music, and so it's taking away that capacity of what musicians would do. In terms of architecture as well, I've told you previously, I've engaged with another architect and I asked him for a job, and he was like, I don't need you to employ you to do these kind of services for me, because I've got AI that does the renderings and all these things that I would normally do. But also it reduces, I can see it from a boss point of view, an employer point of view, where it saves them money, it saves them time. It's like, instead of somebody drawing up for 3 hours, AI is drawing it up in 1 hour. Or it's like even reports, right? So I can understand where they are saving money, but what happens to the guy at the lower level that's looking for the job, that needs the job for his bread and butter, right? So, and unemployment is a serious issue in South Africa. And basically, unemployment is leading youth to turn to alcohol, to drugs, to suicide as well. There's a big suicidal, rate. So it's like all this has an effect on society and the way society operates. So if AI is going to be used for certain things, there's not going to be jobs for other, like, especially young people coming out of varsity. So what are your thoughts on this?
So I will answer it in a number of capacity, because there's a lot of things that you said there. When it comes to artificial intelligence, from an employee's point of view, the dream is automation. I'm saying that is not a reality of where we are yet. So what we are looking at in generative artificial intelligence, which is what the scene has exploded on, that is a reality in mimicking human behavior to produce results that are somewhat creative in endeavor, right? Like it produces things. That's the idea of creativity. It's producing something, it's creating something. Whether that is accurate, whether that is helpful, whether that is useful, the probability of it is it's possibly useful, probably useful, but maybe not always useful. So it's not reliable for automation. Generative artificial intelligence is not for automation. That is a new way for us to engage with the computer to figure out, maybe, is automation the route to go? Can we get these machines to automate everything? But that is not what generative AI is. And that's maybe a misconception, that people think that there's this one broad artificial intelligence that can do everything. This superhuman capabilities, what people call AGI. We are not at that stage. There isn't one artificial intelligence unit that can do all things. Artificial intelligence is a broad field that's made up of many subdisciplines, and each thing, like computer vision, large language models, large world models, image recognition, all of these things are you need experts from people that have been observing these phenomena for as long as time has been around, time immemorial. You need their inputs to be able to help figure out, is the machine actually doing what we think it's doing when we're saying it's seeing something? You need specialists in linguistics, specialists in computer vision, specialists in architecture. The need for the specialists is quite deep to be able to ensure these models are accurate. So that's the first thing. It doesn't have accurate AI, doesn't have accurate views of the world. It's just information of whatever is available to it in its data sets. Secondly, when it comes to, say, by some chance, everything now suddenly becomes automated, it means we should already start thinking about it now, because it is a possibility, although it's not a reality. Say everything does become automated, then as a society, we have to figure out that our structures are not working, and they have not been working. The systems we have not been working for some time. Otherwise, everybody would be employed if they were working. Fundamentally, we already have a problem. So I can't say artificial intelligence is the cause of the problem. It just exacerbated a problem we already had. Our problem is that our systems don't really cater for everyone in society. You have to have people that deeply care about solving these problems to come to the table, to be informed on what artificial intelligence is, to work on a solution that will help us get there. You can't get people that are uninformed working these problems, and it can't be a matter of activism without being informed. So you can be an activist against something, but it's very, very unlikely that if you don't understand what you are fighting against, that you're ever going to be successful to get to a solution. I always advocate for the Socratic argument. It's not who's right or wrong. It's who's closer to the truth. It's about the truth. So both people benefit. So on it losing jobs, it's a possibility that generative AI as an outsourced intelligence, which everyone has access to, we can outsource intelligence, use that outsourced intelligence, and help us figure out how to automate, because generative AI is not for automation. It's a means to help us achieve other things, right? And if it helps us achieve automation, then we can figure out, oh, okay, cool. So what should we do? And then we need to think, okay, we need to structure, maybe your value in society is not necessarily based solely on you having a job. It's about what kind of impact you have on other people, and can we find ways or financial models to support you based on the way you impact other people? Because the idea that you're trading time for money, although time and money are inextricably linked, the issue is that with youth and let's say many young males, their entire self-worth and identity is tied to how much they earn. And if they don't feel like they're earning anything, that's potentially what leads to the suicidal. They think if someone has insurance, they're like, perhaps my life is worth more when I'm dead, because then my insurance will pay out and I'll be able to sustain my family. And those are psychological models we need to change. Your value is not based on how much you earn, although that is a very strong, maybe even primal feeling for a lot of people. Your value is tied to many factors. So we could use artificial intelligence to help us figure out what makes us value, because it is much like a mirror for us. It shows what we think we are and help us to understand what are we better. It is a means to help us understand who we are as humans better, because if we see models behaving in this way, it's based on data we have fed it. It's based on models of human beings. So we can figure out more about ourselves. And I'd say that's maybe a more primary issue to address. And people who care about the issue of what is a human's value in society, they're the ones that should understand what AI is so they can work with this to improve things. And so then when that comes to, finally, unemployment in South Africa, if we become a hub for understanding these technologies, instead of saying, okay, let's play catch up, let's wait for everyone else to do it and then see what happens, we become exporters to the rest of this world of this type of technology, but also for a more humane and ethical way to address it. That's what you want to do. You don't want to be in a place where you're uninformed and unskilled. And so one of the things that you should also do, I was just speaking to someone before this from a firm and talking about what are the attitudes that you should do for jobs of the future. You should get things that are tangible, that recur. So, for example, we always need to eat food. You should get into the agricultural industry, and you can use artificial intelligence to be a means to assist in helping, say, identify crops, which a South African company like Aerobotics does. Or you should get into plumbing and electrical, because these are physical things that we need to happen that can't yet be replaced and most likely won't be replaced quickly. So you should get into what they might call some of the trades, so that you understand how this world works, so that you can see that your value is based on your capabilities and how you relate to other people based on those capabilities. And then you also know you have potentially some sort of stability financially, because these are recurring things that always happen. But then you also will be able to see what your value is in society, because you're like, I don't just get paid. It's not just time for money. It's I actually maintain someone's building where they live with their families. You become very hands-on and very tangible about the way you contribute to society, especially for young men. And I mention that because the suicide rate, as you discussed, is exceptionally high for young men. And when, generally speaking, young males in society are left without support, they generally tend to move towards destructive behaviors because they don't receive that support. But if you attempt to give more care, you just need very few people to put themselves right into it. I always mention to the groups of young men I deal with, generally speaking, because men have a tendency to be assertive by nature, when one man in a society sorts himself out, he tends to assist an entire society in putting themselves together. And that's a more positive way to view masculinity and manhood, so that there's utility, purpose, and value behind you, than just saying, oh, it's time for money and my only thing in life is that I must have a job. Like, it becomes more meaningful. Whew, what a long conversation on this, Marilyn. I think that's my response to that about unemployment.
And I think it's a great response. Thank you for that. I mean, whoever's listening to us is going to get a very deep insight about these things, and I'm grateful for that. So thank you for that. And I agree on what you say. It's more about, at some point in our lives we have to reinvent ourselves. If something is not working, we have to analyze, reflect, and see how we can do things differently. And there will always be challenges and conflict and problems, but how we respond to them will actually help us to rise above it. I think about like these great people like, Newton and Thomas Edison and stuff. How many times did they fail? How many times did it didn't work out? But eventually that time when they didn't give up, the 10,000 time is when they actually came up with that solution that changed society and made them who they are.
So I'll add to that as well, Marilyn. Something I discovered is our relationship with adversity is not good. And that should be a fundamental, and it is, but it's to some degree lost, especially with the youngsters. So I work with a lot of students, so that means people who just come out of high school, and a lot of interns, so people that are in the entry-level careers, and I have a lot of mid-level professionals like myself, right? No, mid-level in their lives. And one of the things that's really important is that they need to be able to find opportunity in adversity, because every adversity that occurs is just an opportunity that's disguised as something really ugly. And you need to be able to be wise enough, patient enough, and persistent enough to see through those. Anything, I would say, that has immense value in society has come because someone has suffered, but decided to look at the suffering as an opportunity to overcome, or an opportunity to do something better. So maybe a better way, a more impactful way to say it, or a deeper way to look at it is, if there's an adversity in your life, what door has opened that you otherwise would never have thought of had this adversity never occurred? So what opportunity has come to you as a result of this adversity occurring that would never have been in your life if it didn't occur? And that allows you to deal with adversity a lot better, because I mentioned to youngsters, you should never ask for an easy life. You should ask for the strength to overcome difficulty so that you can perceive that which is difficult as easy. Because now that you're stronger than it just seems easy. When you're at the gym and you are stronger and you built more, you can lift weights. But the weight was always the weight. 50 kgs never suddenly became 2 kgs. 50 kgs was never 100 kgs. You just got stronger, so the 50 kgs seems a lot lighter to you. And that's better because you can change that. You are in control of those abilities. You can't change the 50 kg. You can't say 50 kg is now 40 kg, for example. That was just to add to that opportunity in adversity. And it took me a long time to understand these things.
That's so true. And I think about your journey as well, because you mentioned before the adversity in architecture led you that one night to contact SACUP because you were just like frustrated with the system and how it's running. And now look where it is. That adversity has led to you to create the South African Young Professional pro MPO, and you've got the Project Y and the South African industry building design. That small adversity that brought so much frustration led to you to unfold to so many things that brought solutions to the problem. And look how the profession has progressed. I mean, with me just getting involved in the little bit with you guys and architects.
You've been there a lot, actually. So
yeah. But I mean, like, you guys brought the PPE program, which is helping the profession. It is the changing the perspective and of SACAP and having them as a co-builder and more cooperative kind of space, as previously it was not that kind of space. So I think it's amazing what you say about adversity. If I'm looking at your life and taking that as an example, because it has shifted and moved so many things to a progressive place that is not just for changing how you feel in your situation in life, but has brought so much change and help for other people and young architects that are coming up and change their life as well and the profession. So,
Marilyn, thanks for it's very, very kind way you put it. I'm appreciative you see it that way, and I'll just bring it back to artificial intelligence very quickly on that. With artificial intelligence specifically, I found that it is a means to assist us in resolving some of the challenges we have. But if you don't really have a humanist perspective, then it's not going to do that. And I'm not saying you must be like an altruist, or I'm not saying you must be charity is not the whole way you must live your life. Now, what I'm suggesting is, people often think artificial intelligence is about the machines, but it's not about the machine. It's about the person. It's because these things that have been created are because, and many people misinterpret it like, Akheel was saying you can never beat human creativity. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that the reason why we have these things that exist in this world is because someone has suffered enough and cared enough through their suffering to make sure that they solve the problem for themselves first, and therefore others will benefit. Whether it's a house or a window, that is a solution to a problem. You can see outside, but you don't get wet. Hey, that's a thought someone had. How can I still see but not get wet from the rain? Oh, let's use glass. That's a window. Someone has had problems and they created it, and that benefited themselves and by default benefited everyone else around them. So you have to care. Otherwise, if you get into artificial intelligence for the sake of the technology, you're going to find yourself lost, and you're also going to find yourself blown with the wind and whichever direction the company wants to take you, or the organizations. You have to be affected. In fact, the rule I generally have is the deeper the frustration, the more meaningful the impact will be once you're out of it. So, but thanks for alluding to that, Marilyn, and thanks for all of your contribution as well so far to all the initiatives that we've started at Y and South African Institute of Building Design, and an architect where I'm the founder.
Yeah, it's quite an inspiring space to be in. And, when you talk about adversity as well, and you're talking about how it creates a solution, would you say that, because I'm assuming, right, you use AI when you came up with your solutions to your adversity, when you came with the whole creating the SIAP, am I right?
So you're not wrong, but it's not accurate. So the advent of artificial intelligence contributed to seeing whether our ideas were feasible. So I already had these structures and ideas in place. What I use artificial intelligence for was to evaluate whether these ideas would work. So I ran it and said, what is the probability that this is a good solution? What would happen if we run the solution? What would happen? What would the impacts be to society? What would the impacts be to the profession? What would the impacts be to our current state of how the systems we have? And then I can make a decision based on those probabilities. I'll look at the probability. I'll say, is it likely that this is going to occur? And then I will adjust. And then I'll say, okay, guys, so what actually happened, how I got involved with South African Institute of Building Design is, first I said their logo sucked. That was one of it. And then afterwards, we had a conversation like, why do you think so? And I explained that. And then I saw what a voluntary association could be. And I wrote a proposal for that. And then I assessed that proposal against artificial intelligence models. I said, here are my requirements. And I said, what's the probability of these being successful? But I tried to look for truth. So I didn't just be like, here's my proposal, and then it says, oh, great proposal. I said, first, I tried to say, what would the conditions be to make a voluntary association successful in South Africa at this moment based on these challenges? And it so happened that the answer it gave me was the same as the proposal I put together. And I could see where there were gaps. And then I filled in those gaps with the information. And then I presented them. So that's the approach I've used to come up with some of the solutions. I've had the solution, but I use this to help me be able to create a more solid argument. And truthfully, I'm not trying to do it because I want the thing is, even in research, if you're only going to ask the direct question, you're never going to have other means to verify whether that answer is correct because you only focus on one way. But now if I can find out by other mechanisms whether what I'm saying is true, then I know I have a very robust argument and answer. I hope that helps explain the concept.
Yes, it does. So it's almost like, when we look at the deeper roots of problems in society, whether it's social, political, or economic structures, we can't assume that technosolutionism is the answer. But it's something to help solve these problems, but the actual way to approach these problems has to be human-centric. Am I right?
Yes, of undoubtedly. Like, I don't know what problems you're trying to solve if it's not human problems. Like, if you're trying to, I don't know, help ants build better nests, I don't know why you're doing that. Like, I'm sure the ants are fine, right? Like, you don't know their whole life and their story. So, like, just let the ants be. The problems you should be solving should come from a human perspective because it's human problems like that you are solving. Like, for example, Imad Mustak, who is the founder of Stability AI, which is stable diffusion, right? He learned about these technologies and whatnot as an attempt to assist his son who had a particular condition. It was a human thing. He cared about his son. He's like, how can I assist my son? And it got him into this. He was also attempting to find a way to God. And he was like, how can I get closer to God? And he was like, cool, here's a way that technology can help me. And the exact details of that is never really entirely mentioned to my knowledge, but it's part of his narrative. And the same with, say, Mustafa Suleyman, who is now the CEO of Microsoft AI, who was a co-founder with Demis Hassabis of DeepMind, which is a company that Google purchased, which is now Google's division that runs artificial intelligence, and is actually Demis Hassabis behind DeepFold or AlphaFold, which helped to create protein structures or predict protein structures. Anyway, Mustafa Suleyman, for example, one of his earlier issues or things he was trying to solve was helping youth in the UK with their mental health conditions. It came from the places these people got into AI wasn't because we love machines. That wasn't the idea. They were trying to solve very human problems. This was a means to solve that problem, and it so happened to give birth to other things. That, in my opinion, is the only way that you should be using to solve problems. Never, I'm doing it for the sake of the thing. Do it for the sake of whatever it is you care about. Does that make sense?
Yes, that does. It brings us back to our human beliefs and values and how do we situate ourselves in society. If I look at it from a religious perspective, they would say that, whether it's service or whether it's doing action that benefit the welfare of society or others. So I think that's quite a good way, the way you phrased it and you explained it. So yeah, thank you for that. And then, we've had such a long conversation. There's so much things we spoke about, and I'm enjoying our conversation here. I just want to get a little bit about the ethics of AI, since we are talking about being human-centric, right? There's good and bad in society and in the world, and AI is currently, being used for disinformation, misinformation. There's also, where does the accountability lies in this whole thing? Because there's no policies that govern it. It's like free reign right now. And this is one of the things that came up when I was at the G20 Interfaith Forum in Cape Town this month in August, and I attended 3 sessions on AI, and all 3 sessions was about this thing about ethics in AI. It can become a threat if you look at in terms of the geopolitical landscape, in terms of war, in terms of security, national defense. There is no international treaty or regulation in government for AI, and it can get out of control. And one of the things they brought up was that you look at the world; it's a capitalist world, right? And under capitalism, can there ever be ethics in AI? Because he mentioned as an example, one of the speakers, that you look at ChatGPT, it's free right now for some people. You get a paid version and you get a free version. And they have to get so much ratings to prove that this thing is viable in terms of its algorithms or what it does. And they have to push these ratings, and until they get these ratings, then only they can get paid on certain aspects of producing certain programming of it. So that was one of the examples that was given. And then if people are pushing for the capitalist idea behind it, then where is the line for ethics? Because you're driven by greed, money, and power. So what are your thoughts about it in terms of ethics? And there is no policies or regulation or international treaty on AI in terms of security and for peace.
So I'm going to bring back home to a story at home here. UCT most recently had a policy which they had implemented about no artificial intelligence being used in specific academic pursuits, right? And they had to rescind this or reverse this. And I'm maybe oversimplifying, and I'm getting some of it a bit muddled up. But the point was they implemented something which they had to reverse. And the idea is because, in my opinion, when it comes to the level of policy, you have to have people that are informed on how the technology works. Otherwise, you're going to be making decisions based on a model of what you think is a model of reality, which might not be the truth. And it always comes back to the truth. So truth and responsibility is something that I mentioned, and I actually just lectured it in class yesterday to the students where I'm lecturing. And after the session, I'm going to talk about the same thing to a group of professionals as part of their continuous professional development. If you do not have accurate perceptions of reality, the way that you are going to do something is going to not work out most likely in the end. And the analogy for this is, if you throw a ball at the window and your analogy of the world is, I can keep throwing it and it's going to come back and not break the window, your analogy of the world is flawed because it is most likely going to break. You don't have the right data sets to know that that's going to happen. And so when you are in pursuit of the truth and you attempt to constantly be honest and truthful. And that's not it's not a morality thing. That's just, I would say, functionally the only way for society to continue. Because if we all don't fundamentally understand the same truth, we're going to decay or go into chaos. So just as a utilitarian perspective, out of functionality, you now have a responsibility to continuously pursue the truth, even if things are very difficult. That's always the case across time for every human, whether the technology is there, whether there's no technology there, whether there's only people, we consistently have to pursue the truth and take the responsibility upon ourselves to do that. When you do that, you'll encounter adversity, no doubt, but then you'll find the opportunity, because there's always opportunity in adversity, and that's how you'll find meaning in life. And that is maybe a core premise, that if you want to lead a meaningful life, do difficult things that other people maybe would go away from in pursuit of finding the truth. And if you do this consistently, and you have people that do this on their own, when you get to the stage where you are making decisions on policy, or when you are in a room of people that are making decisions about things, you must be able to say, guys, this is not truthful. You don't know what you're talking about when you're writing this policy. Bring in people that are informed so we can find a truthful answer. Now we can write policy that's in service of people. You're talking about service. If you're from a religious perspective, if you are a person who is who believes in a particular faith, then they would see this as an act of worship as well. So for a person that is religious, non-religious, say if you're non-religious, generally speaking, you should do things for the advancement of society. And if you are religious, you should also do things for the advancement of society, but you should do it with a higher goal in mind of aligning with what has been created and what God has asked you to do, or rather, what laws God has ordained. So I would say that when it comes to a policy and infrastructure level, we need to firstly have more people that are informed. You can't be having people there that are uninformed and are making decisions based on some sort of emotional reaction or out of fear that something is going to occur. What I always mention to students is you should never be theoretical or just practical. You have to be both, because a fool is one who thinks one is better than the other. So when we have technical knowledge doesn't make you superior to anyone. Technical knowledge is a refinement of a theoretical framework. So technical knowledge means I can prove that this is true. A theory is, can I observe what is my hypothesis that this is true? How can I explain a phenomena? Whereas technicality means let's test to see whether the theory was true. You need both of them. So someone writing policy can have a hypothesis, but they must either have the capability to technically check if it's true or be able to work with people that do technically know that it's true. So then we have a balanced perspective. If you only have people that are on the technical side, you'll not be able to have an entire larger world picture of what's happening. And if you only have people on the larger world perspective, you'll never test if it's true. So you need to have, especially policy making, have a balance between those who know this content matter and those who understand frameworks and legislation and policy. That's the answer towards policy for you. Does that kind of answer some of the question? Okay, so
yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay, so then the next thing you asked me in relation to that, I think around ethics, if we are in pursuit of truth, and perhaps you might say there's different versions of the truth or different ways to access the truth, I think we have to start by universally having first an attitude that people must be informed on things in general. And then secondly, we need to have, whenever there's adversity, you must have people that are willing to solve the problem, that take on adversity, but that make themselves strong enough to do that, because undoubtedly you will have bad actors. Whether we had AI or not, there will always have been bad actors. I can't say because of AI it's more dangerous. Possibly the stakes are raised a bit higher, but so was it the case when we had the atomic bomb, and so was it the case when the gun was invented. And so yes, there has to be regulation around it, but regulation only comes as a result of precedent. Things occur, and then we make laws against it. But what we could do with artificial intelligence now is see, like I was talking to you about solving some of the problems, I said, what are the probabilities that these are going to occur? And let's put in guardrails and measures in place to protect us against this. So we have a lot of people talking about AI, and their interactions with artificial intelligence are based on models that they think, for example, ChatGPT is going to automate things for them. ChatGPT cannot produce the same answer twice. Go and try it out yourself now. If you go and ask ChatGPT something, and you ask the exact same prompt again, it'll give you a different answer. Not different in terms the content is so different. In principle, it's the same. But see, the words will never come out the same, because that's not how the model works. That's fundamentally in its architecture to not do that. So if you have someone that is fearful of automation and they're saying, yeah, ChatGPT is going to take my job, you clearly know that person doesn't know what they're talking about, because they don't understand the technology on a fundamental level. Now you have someone like that making decisions on policy. Now you have a problem, because now you're not only going to restrict competition towards making ourselves informed and strong against potential issues that could occur, but now you're just hindering society from using perhaps what could be seen as the most accessible advanced technology that has occurred. So I would say that we need to inform people. We need to have people in positions of power that work with those that are informed. And then we need to, at very early levels, decide what our value systems are and make sure we stick by it. Truth is a pretty good value system that everyone can agree on. You should always be in pursuit of the truth. Everything else is a little bit more challenging to discuss. But yes, truth, I'd say, should be a fundamental. That's a lot I said, Marilyn.
Yeah. No, but I agree with you. Truth is the only ground you can stand on when it comes to these things. Because, I mean, there's a lot of things going out there in terms of there's a lot of war happening in the world, We spoke about misinformation, disinformation, cyber threats, militaries using AI. So you get someone who hack it and is using it in a bad, negative way. You have problems, escalated war problems. Or, the other thing can happen, like, because I know recently, AI drones were used for striking for countries in war. Or the other thing could happen where we can flip the narrative as society, but as you said before, it depends who we are as an individual and what is our intention and our beliefs in things, because AI could be used for solutions, and that could be peace negotiations, conflict resolution, rebuilding trust in divided communities. It can help with early warning systems and crisis mapping, for conflict zones or humanitarian crisis. And this can be used in a positive way. So it comes back down, I guess, to who you are as an individual. What is your intention? How do you use it to help society? But also, it should, as you said, it should be based on the truth. So I think that's great pointers, and that's good advice that you've given out there. So I hope whoever's listening to us, we didn't lose him along the way in our conversation. Has found this insightful and has found this educational, because for me it's been very educational. I've learned so much from you, Akheel, but in just this conversation about AI that will probably bust my misperceptions as well on AI. But I still don't know where I stand with this thing, so I'm still playing it neutral here. But just as a closing statement, we spoke about so much, and I appreciate our conversation. I appreciate your sharing with us, because it was very insightful in terms from your experience and what you've learned as well. Tell me, what parting message or I don't know, advice or something that you would give to people, especially youth out there, that's embracing this technology, entering a different kind of world. There's a lot going on social media. And so what kind of advice or message would you give for people listening to us that wants to explore AI, that is involved in AI, or is going to be embracing this, and how should they use it in their lives, as a summary of what we've discussed? Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, I think it would be a summary, Marilyn. So there's a few things that I mentioned, but I would first start off by saying that I think we have to change the narrative around adversity first. I think difficulty is a thing that should be embraced, especially if you have a technology like artificial intelligence, which can help and aid you in finding solutions. So young and the youth need to look for difficulty, actively pursue it, so that they can learn how to take on challenges. Because if the technology we have in society makes things easier for us and you stay in ease, society will decay. So in order for society to continuously grow, the youth must go out and find really hard problems to solve, not as a means of being sadistic, but as a means of, if the barrier for what is ease now is the way it is, we must do so much more in society to be able to ensure our continuous progressive growth. And that's how society generally works. We take on difficult tasks, like the buildings that are built, those are built from hard sweat. It's difficult to physically create buildings and design. There's a lot of challenges that go in, but the resultant is something that keeps you cool and warm and safe, right? So youth must take on exceptionally difficult tasks. To do that, they must be in pursuit of the truth. What is really difficult? Is it difficult? Are there other ways to verify this information? And what are the methods to solve these problems? Is that truthfully the way to solve it? And then they need to become informed on how to do that. So the first thing I did when I became aware of the technological advancements that were rapid, namely artificial intelligence, is I got informed. And I got informed, so the information I tell you comes from some of the leading researchers in the world. And it's with the internet, you can sit down with anyone quite easily, whether by listening to them on a podcast or going onto LinkedIn and asking someone, hey, I'm curious about this. Would you care to share with me? Get informed. And so I did that, and I got into networks of people that were informed. And then I decided to pursue informal and formal studies. So I actually did formally study data science, and I did informally attempt to do deep learning for Python, practical coding, programming. I attempted to do all these things on my own in service to find the truth of what's going on. And then I attempted to go into a formal qualification, not because I needed the credential, but because I needed to know how have they created the frameworks to navigate the structure? Because you can know a lot about artificial intelligence, but if you don't understand the framework in which it operates, you don't have a map to truthfully navigate. Then you just become a collector of facts. Then you become, this is what people perceive as technical. They're like, oh, you just know a lot about facts and things. You don't have a framework to understand how these things fit together. What are the relationships? What if I take up this from here? How does it affect something else? So I attempted to pursue formal education to give me the frameworks. So, and the thing is, I must also mention, a lot of things I started, I got what I needed, and then I left. I did it to solve the problem I needed, and I left. So when I did my architectural education, I wasn't going there to be the best architect per se, although that means maybe naively what I started off thinking. But I went there to find out what is architecture, and I got that from it. So everything else was by the way, because I was confident I could do other things. I went to find out one specific truth. What is it? And then I can learn. So some of the things I attempted to do, I got what I needed and I left. I didn't have to finish the entire course. I got what I needed to fill in the frameworks to help me achieve the goal that I was trying to achieve. And you might see this is the same case with a lot of people. Like the typical example is those who go study computer science, they do 1 or 2 years, they realize what they need to know, they leave. They drop out. Bill Gates, and those are a number of people, because you've got the frameworks of how to navigate this thing. You don't need to know every single detail. And I'm not advocating for anyone to drop out of their courses. What I'm trying to say is you need to have a difficult problem you're trying to solve. Try and align your resources to fit in with that. Create a pathway for yourself. Take what you need to solve it and go to solve it. And once you've solved it, if you do, along the way, it wouldn't be about the thing you're trying to solve. It would definitely be about the journey. And that's how you find meaning. And I think finding meaning is something that a lot of architecture designers understand. And in fact, for me, it's one of the reasons I also chose to study architecture, because it was about finding meaning. What is this built environment? If you're in the pursuit of meaning, you will most likely not ever have a purposeless, valueless life. And you will find the strength to continuously move through adversity, because you continuously find meaning whatever occurs. I say that's what young people should do. And I think I've mentioned it on previous podcasts and other places. Take on difficulty so that in taking it on, you also realize you are valuable to society, because you are solving a problem that could impact not only yourself, but others. But it must be an earnest, truthful, sincere endeavor, not you doing it because you want acknowledgement, although that is something that will come by default. I hope that's sufficient, Marilyn.
That's amazingly said. I thank you so much, because you covered up some really good points there. It's not about credentials. It's not about being famous or having that title or position. It's being in a state of curiosity and learning. And when you do that, you find your value, your meaning, your purpose. And at the same time, it brings your finance in on how you need to live, because it becomes your passion and your joy. It's not something like a rat race of life where you're waking up in the morning and just, going to work and you have to pay your bills and have to do this, but it's something of more value. So yeah, thank you for that. I think that's a wonderful way to end off this podcast. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I created this podcast.
Yes, I know.
I was just tired of being bombarded on social media by war and conflict and the negativity. And I'm involved in a lot of peace building work with a lot of interfaith organizations, and including United Nations. And, it's about solutions. So for me, it was like, I've met such amazing people in my life and they're doing such amazing work. And I want to bring them into this space to have conversations, to talk about these solutions, but to give a different perspective that's not one that the world sees right now, because negativity sells and it's easy to be negative. But also there's so much people I've met who are doing such amazing work and have so much value and purpose in life. So thank you, Akheel. Thanks for being on my podcast.
Sorry, just to add to before you end there, I think that's a specifically important place that's difficult that young people should move towards. Peace building, difficult negotiations, like these are things that you shouldn't shy away from. Let's say even if you start in your life as early as trying to resolve your relationship with your parent, that's a form of trying to say you have some sort of terrible relationship with them. I'm sure to some degree, and in most cases, parents and children care about each other quite deeply. If you have a relationship with them and there's friction in it, to be able to learn how to navigate that difficulty, that form of adversity that you maybe didn't put there, but it is there. Or maybe you did, but it's things that you need to solve. If you can start off by trying to build negotiations and figure out how to become more mature in your responses, more grounded, more balanced, and more sincere in the way you try to resolve it, that's a really good start towards further developments in your life. So when you come across, say, difficult personalities, you know how to engage with them. And you come from a perspective of empathy, not from self-righteousness. And I think that is part of what the youth should do. That already, if you're trying to find out what's a problem in the world that's really tough, you should start with a problem that frustrates you deeply at the moment, like deeply moves you to the extent that you feel like your identity is being hurt. And if you can start off with that, because it's a very good indication of what to do, you can start solving those problems, frustrations, whatever it is. Maybe you feel like, my high schooling system sucked and it was so bad, it deprived me of opportunities to get into university. Then that's a place you need to start solving problems, but tackle them really. These are quite challenging problems. Start with the ones that maybe affect you the most, because it empowers you to then tackle problems on scale that help a lot more people, or at least will help you when you are in that position. But thanks, Marilyn. That's all from me. Appreciate it. I just wanted to say that it's quite true. Peace building is an important place where artificial intelligence can help, especially to humanize and empathize a situation or find solutions we otherwise wouldn't have considered.
Yeah, I agree. And thank you so much on that. I mean, there's so much youth I've met at the G20 conference in Cape Town that are doing such amazing work in terms of peace building and helping with conflict resolution in the communities from around the world. Even if it's at grassroots levels, everything counts at the end of the day. But I was just so inspired in that space by youth leadership, and that they are like bringing such a positive change in this world. So I agree with everything like you said in terms of, in your adversity, find that and go and help and make a difference and find your purpose. So thank you, Akheel. And I think I'm just grateful to have you on this podcast and have this amazing conversation. Whoever listened to us, I hope you found it engaging, insightful, inspiring. And maybe at another time, Akheel, if another conversation open up, I will invite you again and maybe we can talk about architecture or other things. But I'm so grateful to have you here right now, and especially about artificial intelligence. So
I'm very appreciative that you thought to ask me. So thank you, Marilyn.
Okay, cool. Thank you.